What's up, everybody? Franco here from Frank Analysis. We're going to talk about a topic here about child slave labor and big companies like chocolate companies who use slave labor in other countries. Um, we're going to get into that, but first, please make sure you like this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel. And also, make sure you follow me on Rockfin. You can sign up and create a free account. Subscribing to my channel for $10 a month also really helps. You don't have to subscribe to my channel. You can also subscribe to other independent content creators on there, and then you can get the premium content of everybody who is on Rockfin. YouTube has officially demonetized me, so the best way that you can support me is by following me in alternative platforms like Rockfin, like Odyssey, or donating to any of the links that are below. So this topic is not being talked about enough. It's not being talked about enough in the mainstream media, of course, but it's also not being talked about in independent media either. There's a lot of other stuff that's going on, but still, that's why we need more voices that can talk about things that are being overlooked, such as this. All right, Mars, Nestle, Hershey to face child slavery lawsuit in the U.S. Chocolate companies are among the defendants in a named lawsuit brought by former child workers in Ivory Coast. These are all chocolate companies that a lot of people like, and it needs to get exposed. I mean, there's a lot of people that buy these products, and I think the best way that we can show our support for these children is to not buy from these chocolate companies. Don't do it. Don't buy from them. They're evil. And what we're about to get into is is really one of the worst cases of modern day colonialism and imperialism that the United States does. It's been going on for a while. So chocolate companies are among the defendants named in a lawsuit brought by former child workers in Ivory Coast. So the article begins by saying that 8 children who claimed they were used as slave labor on cocoa plantations in Ivory Coast have launched legal action against the world's biggest chocolate companies. They accuse the corporations of aiding and abetting the illegal enslavement of thousands of children on cocoa farms in their supply chains. And let me just remind people, this is published on The Guardian. I'll have a link to this article in the description. Nestle, Cargill, Berry, Callebaut, Mars, Olam, Hershey, Mondelez have been named as defendants in a lawsuit in Washington, D.C. by the human rights firm International Rights Advocates, the IRA, on behalf of 8 former child slaves who say they were forced to work without pay on cocoa plantations in the West African country. The plaintiffs, all of whom are originally from Mali and are now young adults, are seeking damages for forced labor and further compensation for unjust enrichment, negligent supervision, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. So they're now old, these kids, like they're now adults. Imagine how many more cases of this are going on right now that are not being reported. And there's people that are not speaking out about it because, a lot of these children are still children. I mean, it's a miracle that some of these children grew up to be adults and are now speaking out about this. It is the first time that a class action of this kind has been filed against the cocoa industry in a U.S. court, citing research by the U.S. Department, the International Labor Organization and UNICEF, among others. The court documents allege that the plaintiff's experience of child slavery is mirrored by that of thousands of other minors. Ivory Coast produces about 45% of the global supply of cocoa, a core ingredient in chocolate. The production of cocoa in West Africa has long been linked to human rights abuses, structural poverty, low pay, and child labor. A central allegation of the lawsuit is that the defendants, despite not owning the cocoa farms in question, knowingly profited from the illegal work of children. According to the submissions, the defendants' contracted suppliers were able to provide lower prices than if they had employed adult workers with proper protective equipment. So that it's horrible. And they look at these children, they're like, oh, they're disposable. You know, they're not going to stand up for themselves. They're just little children, and so we're going to exploit that. And exploitation is a characteristic of capitalism. The lawsuit also accuses the companies whose industry body is the World Cocoa Foundation of actively misleading the public in the voluntary 2001 Harkin-Engel Protocol, characterized by the companies as promising to phase out some child labor, the worst forms in the protocol's words. The original deadline for achieving certain standards was 2005. In 2010, a follow-up framework of action for Ivory Coast and Ghana spoke of aiming for a significant reduction in the worst forms by 2020. In the legal claim, all 8 plaintiffs described being recruited in Mali through trickery and deception before being trafficked across the border of cocoa farms in Ivory Coast. There, they were forced to work, often for several years or more, with no pay, no travel documents, and no clear idea of where they were or how to get back to their families. Like, these people are in desperate situations. They're living, they're poor, they're starving. They want to help their family, and then they get mistreated like this. And again, I'm going to reiterate it. This is a characteristic of capitalism. It's exploitation. This is imperialism. Imperialism is the highest form of capitalism. And it's not only with this, like, we do this when we force labor on other countries, African countries, to mine for components that are put in a lot of the things that we hold. Like, for example, in your pocket, your phone, it's made via slavery. And the US, and now with the Great Reset, which was announced in the World Economic Forum, they want to expand this for, like, so that we can mine for cobalt in countries like the Congo and lithium in countries like Bolivia. We wanna expand via deep sea mining, so we can build enough for, like, these 5G technologies that are going to increase surveillance. And it's not just with that, though. We're seeing that with things that people use to please themselves, like chocolate. It's also a product of exploitation and child labor. And this needs to be spoken out about as much as possible, so that we can finally get an end to this. So the court papers allege that plaintiffs, all of whom were under 16 years old at the time of their recruitment, worked on farms in major cocoa producing areas in the country. The defendants' apparent influence in these markets is described as dominant by the plaintiffs' counsel. The lawsuit claims one plaintiff was only 11 years old when a local man in his hometown of, and I can't pronounce that city name, I'm sorry, but it's in Mali. They promised him work in Ivory Coast for 25,000 CFA francs, which is equivalent to 34 euros a month. The legal documents allege that the boy worked for 2 years without ever being paid, often applying the pesticides and herbicides without protective clothing. If they're using products that are similar to those of which Monsanto uses, which has components in it that is linked to non-Hodgkin lymphoma, like, these kids are being put in these conditions where they're going to get them some diseases if they're not using protective gear. Documents claim another child named as plaintiff in the suit had visible cuts on his hands and arms from machete accidents. Speaking of his experience of forced labor between 2009 and 2011, he recalls being constantly bitten by insects. As with most plaintiffs, he claims in the lawsuit that he was promised payment after the harvest, but it never came. Many of the plaintiffs quoted the court documents report being fed little and working long hours. Often they claimed they were kept alone or isolated from other child workers who spoke different dialects. During field work for this case, the plaintiff's legal team say that they routinely found children using machetes, applying chemicals, and undertaking other hazardous tasks on cocoa plantations that were producing for one or more of the defendants. As well as being morally repugnant, such abuses against children represent a humanitarian disaster as they contribute to Ivory Coast's ongoing poverty, the court papers state. The widespread use of child slavery is also credited by the plaintiffs for causing long-term mental and physical trauma. Like these are traumas that they're living with today. And again, this is just one case out of the thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of cases that we're doing this, and it's because of U.S. companies. They want to cut profit, and so they get these child laborers. The case documentation maintains that the defendants are responsible for developing the entire cocoa production system of Ivory Coast, a key participants in the venture. It is claimed that they either knew or should have known about the systematic use of child labor. The case is being brought under the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2017. IRA is currently involved in separate complaint filed under the Alien Tort Statute against Nestle and Cargill. Nestle owns so many things. It's not just chocolate. It's other candies such as Nerds. Like a lot of the things that you guys probably grew up with or have children who eat it. They also own water bottles. I mean, there's Nestle water bottles, and again, I'm going to reiterate this. The best way that we can show support for these children who are dealing with trauma is by not buying Nestle products, not buying products by Mars or any of these other companies that are being discussed here. In a statement, Cargill said, "We are aware of the filing. While we cannot comment on specifics of this case right now, the company wants to reinforce we have no tolerance of child labor in cocoa production. Children belong in schools. They deserve safe living conditions and access to good nutrition." Well, then, if this has been ongoing for years, like this child slave labor by these big companies, isn't that something that you should look into if you're getting your resources from other countries like this, from poor countries where people are normally exploited? That's something that your company should have been investigating. They should have known about this, and something tells me that they probably already knew. Nestle said that the lawsuit does not advance the shared goals of ending child labor in the cocoa industry, and added, "Child labor is unacceptable and goes against everything we stand for. Nestle has explicit policies against it and is unwavering in our dedication to ending it. We remain committed to combating child labor within the cocoa supply chain and addressing its root causes as part of the Nestle Cocoa Plan and through collaborative efforts." Well, I mean, they don't give any detailed response of how they're going to take action to end it, though. And again, this has been going on for years. This is not the first time that something like this has happened. Maybe it's not the first time that it's happened to Nestle. I think that it is not the first time. But if it's been ongoing for years, then that tells me that nothing is being done. Nothing effective is being done to end it. And I think we're going to keep seeing more of these cases happening with not just Nestle or Mars or Cargill or any of these other companies. It's going to keep happening as long as we continue to have this capitalist system. An Olam spokesperson said that the company has a zero tolerance policy for forced or slave labor in their supply chain. If we were to identify any instances, we would immediately take action, which includes notifying the appropriate authorities, they said. A spokesperson for Hershey said, "We understand and agree with the concerns about the heartbreaking instances of child and forced labor. Hershey does not tolerate child or forced labor in our supply chain. These human rights violations have no place in the global cocoa industry, and we are committed to ending it effectively. Eliminating human rights violations and addressing the underlying issues of poverty that is the root cause of these labor violations requires significant investment and intervention on the ground in West Africa, not in the courts. We have worked hard over the past several years to implement meaningful programs and work with our cocoa suppliers of West African governments to combat these issues and use our influence to make positive impact." Again, this is still ongoing. It looks like their efforts were meaningless if they're still ongoing. This is just damage control, these statements that they make. Of course, they're going to be like, oh, we stand against it, but their actions show otherwise. This is par for the course for what U.S. companies do, and the best thing that you can do to support, at least when it comes to things like chocolate. Like, don't buy off of these mainstream products, like these mainstream corporations that sell these chocolate products. Don't buy off of Hershey or Nestle. Look, it's so many of them. Don't buy off of them. Like, there's more. There's smaller businesses out there that you can support. Don't get any like Nestle water bottles, or don't get any like Nerds, or like, these things are poisonous in and of themselves anyway, because they add products to them that are linked to autoimmune diseases. So yeah, that's the best thing that you guys can do, so you can help these people, these people that are dealing with trauma now, these children that are going through, you know, the worst kind of lives that you can think of. So yeah, share this video, like this video. It helps with the algorithm, and subscribe to this channel if you have not yet subscribed, so you can help independent media grow. I love you all, and stay informed.